One of the things I do in my textbook is raise questions about assumed positions on world religions, and one of these is the relationship between Buddhism and Hinduism. And most textbooks argue that you have an evolutionary development of religion, and this comes out of the work of Max Muller and 19th century scholars. It comes out of very much British India and the imperial tradition, that Hinduism was there first, and then Buddhism was a reform movement within Hinduism, and this is the way things are presented. I question this. Now, it's not just me that questions it. There are a number of scholars that question it, and traditionally Buddhists questioned it. Buddhists never agreed that Buddhism was actually a reform movement of Hinduism. Buddhism was a religion long before Hinduism as far as they were concerned. Now, when one looks at the evidence, you've got, as archaeological and historical facts, things like the kingdom of Asoka in India in the 4th century BC, 3rd, 4th century BC, where you've got a Buddhist kingdom in India covering most of India. And that then goes into decline, and the successors go into decline, and then you get the Hindu tradition, Hindu kingdoms coming up. But the Buddhist kingdoms exist before the Hindu kingdoms archaeologically. If one looks at Hindu temples, you don't get the development of Hindu temples in India until around the 3rd or 4th century AD. You get Buddhist inscriptions from the 3rd and 4th century BC. Buddhist inscriptions exist before Hindu inscriptions across India. So why is this? I mean, if Buddhism comes out of Hinduism, why is all this sort of hard evidence for a Buddhist civilization and not for a Hindu civilization? The early Chinese travelers through India, and there are a number of Chinese texts from the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th century onwards of travelers going into India, writing records of what they observe. And they never talk about Hinduism. They talk about Buddhism. So why is that? What happens? And, you know, I'm not saying that Hinduism wasn't there all along. I think probably the Hindu tradition was there all along, but I don't think it was as dominant as modern Hindus and modern scholars generally think it was. Although, as I say, the scholarship on this is changing. There are people who are now questioning the evolutionary interpretation of religion. It's a very neat interpretation. You have the Indus Valley civilization, that collapses. You have about 1,000 years of no records of anything, but gradually Hinduism seeps up again and comes to the fore, and the Aryans convert, and everyone's Hindu. And then you've got reform movements, the Upanishads and the Buddhists are all part of the reform movement. I think life's a lot more complicated than that. And while you can have reform movements in Christianity that are well documented, like the Reformation, we haven't got very good documentation that Buddhism comes out of Hinduism. We have records of arguments between Hindus and Buddhists throughout history. Our earliest written texts would be Buddhist rather than Hindu, because Hinduism the Hindu tradition was an oral tradition. Now, this complicates things, but at least this is one of the things I raise as a possibility. I'm not saying I'm committed to this. Looking at the evidence, the Indian archaeological surveys and things, I honestly don't know, and only about 1% of India is being excavated. So it's a very, very small amount that we're basing a lot of things on. But it's something that should be taken seriously. We shouldn't automatically assume that what was very much an imperial interpretation. I mean, this was something that came up with British scholars trying to explain India in terms of British imperial aims, in terms of the empire. And Buddhism had more or less died out in India by the time the British were there. So Hinduism was the major religion, the Hindu tradition. And then you've got the Muslims. And so how do you explain it all? And it was in the British interest to stress the longevity of the Hindu tradition. And of course, Hindus like that, but it's not necessarily true. And so we've got to think it through and question it. So that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to encourage people to be critical and reflective on these issues.